My name is Julio Herrera Vidal. I was a conscript soldier in the Air Force, and my Air Force military base was Mar del Plata. I was deployed to Air Force military base Santa Cruz with my battery. I was in anti-aircraft systems in the Air Force.
Right, okay. So this whole video, this whole Zoom meeting has been arranged by you, and you are the connection in Argentina, and you've made this possible. So I'd like to thank you for that. And now me, Edward Denmark, and Richard Hutchings are going to talk. So thank you very much for everything you've done, and you've made all this possible.
I want to thank you too for your support, and let me say something. We are here to tell part of the hidden history of the Falklands and Malvinas War in Patagonia mainland. It's going to be very important what you say, you, Edward, and Richard, from now on. And now I hand over to a very good friends of mine, Edward Denmark and Richard Hutchings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all you do for us,
Julio,
and support.
I hope we can do justice, not just for you, but for all the soldiers who haven't been recognised. And we will offer, hopefully, proof that there was contact between the SAS and SBS and Special Forces on the Patagonian mainland, which will dispel everything the Argentine government has said about there being no combat in Patagonia. We all know this is untrue, and we all know there was contact, and we all know there was firefights, and what they've done for the past 39 years is an absolute injustice. So let's get this started. And once again, thanks very much for everything you've done.
Thank you. Thank you for the both of you and all the British mates who support us. And let me say something. All my respect for both sides, for both of our fallen mates in the conflict.
Thank you.
And after the conflict too.
I appreciate that. And it's the same for me, the fallen and injured on both sides. And I offer my respect to all the Argentine soldiers who were in Patagonia and fought in the same war as I did. Even though I was on the Malvinas Falklands, it makes no difference. You are all combatants. You are all VGM.
Thank you for everything, brother.
Yes, you're very welcome. And the Argentine government needs to know this is not going to stop until you receive recognition.
Yes, yes. We, 40 years is too much time.
It is.
Too much.
I totally agree with you.
There are no words to describe it.
And you need to understand that both Richard and I are doing this because we want to help out fellow soldiers. This has nothing to do with the Malvinas Falklands sovereignty, right? That is not up to us. We are here purely, right, to get justice for the soldiers who have failed to be recognised. So my name is Edward Denmark. I served in 12 Air Defence Regiment Royal Artillery in T Battery Chargeurs Troop in 1982. And I worked on towed Rapier anti-aircraft missile systems. We sailed from Devonport docks on the 6th of April, 1982. And after a voyage of 8 months and a stop in Ascension Island, we arrived along with the rest of the task force on the 21st of May, 1982 in San Carlos waters, and eventually steamed into San Carlos Bay. Our job was primarily to defend the San Carlos and the surrounding hills, and possibly the ships if needed be from any enemy aircraft attack. Now, as has been well documented, we come under air attack pretty soon after daylight. Although we were meant to have been, deployed by daylight, because of various things, military planning had gone wrong, we were still on the ship in daylight and subjected to air attack whilst on board. Fortunately enough, our ship wasn't hit, and a Sea King helicopter was transferring the guys to shore, and eventually our turn came and the Sea King bounced down. The loadmaster beckoned us forward with a choice language, to get a move on, because they didn't want to be sitting on the deck. Yeah, I was the last guy on, and I remember him telling me to undo me webbing and stuff because I had the Charlie Carl Gustav anti-tank rounds on me back. And basically, if that helicopter had gone in the water, we would have gone down like stones. So he said, just undo your webbing, you're by the door. So it did. And I recall vividly looking forward and seeing the two pilots at the front and the Mirage going across, firing its guns and stuff. And there was no reaction from the pilots. They remained super cool. And it gave me a kind of, I expected them to panic for some reason, but they didn't. They stayed absolutely focused on what they were doing. And the helicopter took off very quickly, like I've never been in, experience before in any helicopter. It took off quite quickly, took us ashore. It was a very short journey, and we just bailed out and it was gone. I mean, it just didn't hang around. Obviously, it was gone. So in 1982, my battery, T battery, was responsible for shooting down 14 Argentine aircraft, he said. Now, whether they did hit everyone, can be debated. I've seen proof that we did, and I've seen proof that we didn't, and arguments to and fro. But whatever happened, we definitely shot down a number of aircraft. I mean, I've seen it myself with my own eyes. And my Rapier, we shot down one Mirage, which, and a couple of near misses. But like all the guys on the ground, if he wasn't sitting in the seat on the Rapier, then we fired in the air with our weapons, in the hope that, well, at least we're putting something in the air and he might fly into it. So that was my role. Leading on to, the guys in Patagonia and the Argentines, I first got talking to a guy called Pepe Sanchez, who was an A4 Skyhawk pilot on Facebook. And this led me to be in contact with the Argentines. And it was very good, actually. I really, enjoyed talking to them and the pilots and stuff like that. Just, finding out what it was like to be in the air and be on the receiving end rather than being on the ground and the bombs falling and stuff. I found it quite fascinating. And I got talking about IFF and stuff like that, and it turns out they didn't use IFF, or they didn't have it, which we didn't know at the time. And a lot of our pilots failed to put their IFF on, so we were getting false alarms and stuff on our own aircraft, so that become useless. So the guy who was meant to be talking with us tonight, Julio Herrera Vidal, when I got talking to him and he told me about the guys in Patagonia, I was very surprised that they haven't been recognized. And he said there's nearly 10,000 of them. Now, considering they were deployed by their own government to that region, and their job was to defend the area, service the aircraft, and also repair them, I was quite upset at it, to be honest with you, that these guys who had been, sent to that area hadn't been recognised, because we quite rightly recognised the guys who were 4,000 miles away in Ascension, who were part of the chain in supplying us everything we needed. And as far as I'm concerned, the guys in Ascension played a role so important, because we couldn't function without them. We wouldn't have had the missiles or the food and all the things we needed to do our job. So I kind of got involved in defending these guys and supporting them. you know, the question of the Falklands and sovereignty has nothing to do with it as far as I'm concerned. It's solely from one soldier to another saying you should be recognised for the job you've done, because, you know, their DNA, as far as I'm concerned, and their fingerprints were on the very bombs that were dropped on us. And the aircraft that were able to deliver them bombs were serviced by them, armed by them, and repaired by them. And I could never understand the Argentine government saying you're not being recognised. I mean, the distance is what, less than 400 miles away, something like that. You know, so I was very surprised at it. And when I went over last year, or 2020, the beginning of last year, you know, I seen the desperate state of some of these men and the way they're living, and I was really absolutely, you know, saddened by it. You know, a lot of them, we're all getting old now, you know, regardless of what age we were in 82, we are all moving on. And some of them were in desperate, you know, health crisis and stuff like that. And so it just fired me up even more to help them, you know, and I've received a lot of support from a lot of the guys, you know, in what I'm doing, and I think it's the right thing to do. The Argentine governments are still denying anyone landed over there to do anything, which is totally ridiculous. I mean, it's on the open market in books like yours and other books. That obviously the British went over there, you know, and landed like you did yourself. It's not a secret anymore. It's nearly 40 years ago, and everybody, you know, is totally aware of it, and yet they're hanging on to this as a reason not to recognize these guys, which I think is totally wrong. So, like I said, when I went over there, I'll offer them all the support I can while I've got my health at the moment. And that is my take on it. You know, I recognize them for what they've done as fellow soldiers. In the same way, I go sit in Sainsbury's for the British Legion, you know, when I can. I'll sit there all day and I'll collect money for our soldiers, and I'll help our soldiers. I'll help any soldiers, you know, and I will offer these guys all the support I can.
I'm Richard Hutchings. I was commissioned into the Royal Marines as a second lieutenant in 1973. Normal commando service, served in a few commando units, Northern Ireland tours, all that sort of thing. In 1978, trained as a pilot with the Army Air Corps. Then straight away went to the Navy and trained as a pilot with them to fly the Wessex Mark V. Then in 1981, converted onto the Seeking Mark IV. Also in 1981, I attended the last module of the SAS qualifying course at Hereford, which is called the Combat Survival Instructors course, which is all about operations behind enemy lines. So how you do it, how you survive, how you navigate, all aspects of that.
Right.
In 1982, I was one of two Royal Marines flying with the Royal Navy on 846 Squadron. And we were both flying Seeking Mark IVs, because by that stage, the squadron had converted entirely from Wessex 5 to the Seeking 4. We deployed from from Portsmouth on the 5th of April, my wife's birthday of all days. Wonderful gift for her. With some of the Seekings of the squadron, but not all of them. Our senior pilot led the detachment. Our commanding officer came down on the Fearless when they deployed a bit later with a different detachment, because he wanted to be with the brigade commander, because that was his role. Joining us, as not previously a member of our squadron, was a chap called Peter Rainey, who sadly is no longer alive. He died in a drowning accident in Cyprus, trying to save his wife and children from drowning. And sadly, he drowned. But he was a test pilot, and he and a flight test engineer had been testing prior to use night vision goggles, the American Andis night vision goggles. And we weren't flying with them. No military aircraft were flying with them at that time. So we deployed with a dozen sets of these, and we headed south on our way to Ascension. we had to select crews. We needed 4 crews to convert onto flying with night vision goggles rather than doing normal day and normal night flying. So we selected those crews. We flew over land on the goggles for the first time on Ascension on one night before we then moved on. And we selected our 4 crews. And then we headed down to the Falklands on the Hermes to arrive in the total exclusion zone on the 1st of May. And my role and the role of the other guys who like me had converted was flying special forces flights into the islands to conduct reconnaissance initially. No offensive missions, it was all intelligence flying because we hadn't a clue where the Argentinian dispositions were, other than we knew there were a lot of them around Stanley, and we knew there were a lot of them on West Falkland as well, but we didn't know anything about anywhere else. So we were finding our way really, dropping off the teams, a few days later picking up some teams were in position for a long time, so we were resupplying them. Then of course there was on the 4th of May the incident whereby the Sheffield was hit by an exocet, and the government realised that the exocet was probably the most dangerous weapon in that area to the survival of our shipping, and something had to be done about it. So Peter Delabille, who was director SAS at the time, came up with the concept of an operation called Mikado in 2 phases. The first phase was to send a reconnaissance team from the task force into Argentina to conduct a reconnaissance of the Rio Grande base where we knew that the aircraft were based, the superintendents. And then having confirmed their presence, the rest of B Squadron 22 SAS that were on Ascension would be flown in C-130s onto the runway. They would deploy, they would destroy the aircraft, they would kill as many Argentine aircrew as they could, get back into the aircraft and fly off. If the aircraft were damaged, they were then to make their way on foot into Chile. And that essentially was the mission. So the first part of that, the reconnaissance, was known as Plum Duff. That was a mission that required a Sea King with a normal crew of 3 to fly an SAS team of 8 from the task force into Ascension, into Argentina. Now, the guys that we flew in from B Squadron were parachuted into the sea to us from Ascension. We dried them off and got them ready because all their kit was sopping wet to be flown in. But because they got a thorough drenching, it took 24 hours for all their kit and their radios and so on to dry out. So we were 1 day later than ideal to fly in on the mission, because the weather forecast for the day that we did fly in overnight wasn't brilliant, 17th into the 18th of May. When we arrived at the Argentine coast, we were in fog, dense fog. Night vision goggles don't work in fog. They need ambient light, which you get from the moon. And the moon state then was in its very final, it was about to die, so it was hardly any moon at all. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning after a 4-hour flight. And we could only fly so far until we realized that there were no more references, there's no more light, we just had to land. We were then about 7 miles short of our destination. The destination was what we believed was a deserted estancia, a farm, a few miles north of the Rio Grande base. When we got there, pointed out to the SAS team leader where we were, and he said, well, this isn't where we're supposed to be. I don't have the same degree of confidence in your navigation that you do, so I want you to fly us into Chile, which is where we were going on to destroy the aircraft anyway as part of the operation. Then he said, we'll make our way back into Argentina from there on foot, once we've got a firm position, understanding where we are. So we argued with him, but he refused to get out the aircraft with his men, even though a couple of them had already jumped out. They were called back in. So off we went. At that stage, the very rudimentary handheld radar warning device that we had in the aircraft detected the radar from the Rio Grande base, so we knew we'd be detected. We had to climb to 3,500 feet to get over the mountain range before we could then drop down into Chile, into an area known as Bahia Inútil, which translates into useless bay, which we believe, discovered by an English adventurer hundreds of years earlier, and he named it as Useless Bay. We found a position to land and landed there, and the SAS team leader was then very satisfied that we were where we were supposed to be. So at that point, they all got out of the aircraft and started heading east again towards Argentina to continue their mission. And we then flew across the Straits of Magellan to hit the coastline there and then fly north towards Punta Arenas. And we'd already identified from aerial photography a couple of potential places where we could destroy the aircraft. So we got to the one that was closest to Punta Arenas, which was about 10 miles away. It was still dark, just landed. My co-pilot and my aircrew got out the back with our kit. I then flew out to sea a short distance, about 400 yards, landed on the water. Now, before we had taken off from that beach, my co-pilot and aircrewman had made some massive holes in the bottom of the aircraft with axes so that it would fill up and help with sinking. Because the object was then to sink the aircraft and I swim back ashore. But what we hadn't realised, because this hadn't been trialled, was when you land on the water and it's got a boat-shaped hull, so it's designed to land on the water, it was like a millpond, absolutely calm. It quickly filled up with water between the outer skin of the hull and the inner skin of the hull. And it gave the aircraft what was in effect a very heavy keel and made us completely stable on the water. The thing wouldn't sink. Wow. I couldn't turn it over. I tried, varying rotor speed and working the controls to try and turn it over, but it just wouldn't. So I pulled in full power and got the thing off the water, which is really difficult, to fly back in on the land to see if there's something else we could do. And as I flew back in, because the fuel level was so low, because we'd been flying for 6 hours and the endurance was sinking for 6 hours, these lights came on, blinded me, and hit a sand dune, and essentially destroyed the rotor blade system. So I had no choice then but to set fire to the aircraft and destroy it that way.
That's incredible.
Our orders were not to surrender, not to give ourselves up for 8 days. So we moved at night only on foot.
Was that in order to let the SAS do what they needed to do? So you could give information, yeah. Yeah,
exactly that. Because we didn't know how we'd be received and how we'd be interrogated.
Yeah, of course.
In fact, we were eventually, after 8 days of traveling at night, lying up during the day, we went past a Carabinieri headquarters on the southern extremes of Punta Arenas. There's no way around it, couldn't go through it. It had an electric fence around it and warning signs saying trespassers will be shot. So we thought, well, we'll walk up the main road. We went as a pair, and the air crewman was a few hundred yards behind us. We were wearing part uniform with parts of being closed. And we did it deliberate at lunchtime to mix in with the local people. And we got past on the main gate. We looked at us, just saw us walk past. And we went just round the corner because we could see there's a telephone box there, and I had a phone number for the embassy. And this Carabinieri captain was on his way back to the base after lunch. And he thought, they must be the British aircrew. And he pulled up in his car alongside us. And he said, are you the missing British airman? It was like an episode of Hello, Hello. And we said, no, we're off the British ship that's in the docks. And he said, there is no British ship in the docks. You are the British airman. Please get in my car. And he then drove us into their base. We had a wonderful reception. They gave us red wine and they asked if we wanted food and coffee and so on. We were interrogated. We were taken to this interrogation center, which under that particular regime was where they had been questioning people that they considered to be enemies of the regime.
Yes.
Actually had a sign up saying Center for Interrogation and Torture.
Wow.
We weren't shy about it. But we were interrogated by English-speaking submariner commander who had trained with the Royal Navy. And the only sought one assurance, which was that there were no special forces on Chilean soil, or gave me that assurance. And then that night we were flown in a C-130 Hercules, a British C-130 Hercules in Chilean colours with a line and registration and a joint crew up to Santiago.
Wow.
We were then taken to the home of the consul. The next morning into the embassy. We were told by the ambassador that we had, once Pinochet realized we were there, to spend the night with him in the presidential palace and have dinner with him. John Heath, the ambassador, very sensibly turned down that invitation.
I wonder why.
But Pinochet insisted that we made a press statement before we left, so that the world could see that we're alive and well and had been properly treated.
Yeah.
And I had a cover story all about sea patrols and engine failures and getting lost in bad weather. That was pre-prepared, so I delivered that in English, which was then followed by a Spanish translation. And the Welsh press was in that room. John Snow from Channel 4 was one of the
Right.
And we then left immediately down the lift into cars, straight off to the airport, onto a civil flight back to the UK. Identities were changed, false passports, genuine false passports, new names, etc. Flew in to Rio initially, refuel, and then flew on to Madrid. The operation, unbeknown to us, because we weren't told this part, once we arrived in Madrid, we were supposed to have been intercepted by Interpol, taken to the British Embassy, put onto a secret flight, flown directly to Ascension, debriefed, flown back down to the Falklands and parachuted into the sea to rejoin the operations. That was the plan, but we didn't know anything about that. When we got to Madrid, that aeroplane had been full of Argentinian journalists on their way to Spain for the World Cup coverage. They recognized us straight away from our press conference, and the press bring us on the aircraft for interviews, which we refused. So we flew in the cockpit with the pilots just to keep ourselves
away from them.
Yeah. And I speak a little bit of Spanish, but not a lot. But I heard one of these reporters on the telephone phoning Reuters to tell them that we were in Madrid and we were booked onto a flight to Heathrow that afternoon. Having heard that, I then secretly changed our flight into Gatwick. So when we arrived at Gatwick, there were only about 10 press covering that just in case.
Yeah.
The big press corps were all at Heathrow where we were.
Foiled.
And then we were picked up in a taxi, taken to the Ministry of Defence, had a meeting with Admiral Louis, Chief of Defence Staff.
Yeah.
Then taken by MI6 to a safe house in the country, stayed there for a few days, and then returned to our base. Meantime, of course, the team we dropped off were making their way slowly back into Argentina.
Yes.
But a member of their team became sick after a couple of days on the ground. So the team leader had to take the decision that he would either split his team 4 on 4, or he'd keep them all together. He decided to keep them all together and abort the mission. And they left Argentina a few days later via Chile, the same way that we did, essentially.
Wow, so they got away okay.
was flown into Tierra del Fuego, picked them up, took them to Punta and then another flight up to Santiago. What's interesting and particularly sinister, I feel, is that the airplane which flew them from Punta Arenas to Santiago then flew back down towards Punta Arenas and vanished without sight, never been seen to this day.
Wow.
The pilot,
That's amazing.
remarkable. As a result of all of that and putting all of that into my book published in 2008,
Could I just ask you to say the title of your book?
Special Forces Pilot.
By Richard Hutchings.
I was contacted by quite a large number of Argentinian former conscripts who had been based on the mainland, not in the Malvinas, not in the Falkland Islands. And they wanted to tell me their stories. That some of these people had been based in Rio Gallegos, some were in Rio Grande, some at Mar del Plata, various places. And they told me their stories about how they had interacted in firefights with our special forces on the mainland. Now, this was not the team I dropped off. These were other teams that
Yes.
were inserted subsequently to my operation. And I've got a list of the names of those people, Argentinian conscripts, and some regulars as well, who lost their lives in those firefights. It's getting on for about 20 names. The most senior Argentine officer to be killed in the conflict died on the mainland.
Yes.
The colonel, posthumously promoted brigadier, because that's one of the really good things about the Argentine system. If a person's killed on active service, they're posthumously promoted. So their next of kin receives a higher pension. And some of these stories are absolutely amazing. And when you receive so many accounts from so many people telling the same story with hardly any variation at all, you know it's absolutely right.
Yes, that is something that I found out when I went over to Argentina, that various people, the stories regarding the firefights between British Special Forces and the Argentines in the Patagonia region matched up. Not exactly the same, you know, people have got different perceptions, but if it was before a jury, as far as I'm concerned, they would absolutely accept what them men are telling them. There was undoubtedly firefights and lives lost.
Yeah, the largest number of them were killed in a helicopter, shot down by a steamer missile from by a submarine.
That's right. Yeah, it's so, you know, the Argentine government's claim they didn't see any action was totally wrong, and still is wrong. And I think, you know, they need to address that.
These guys have been dealt a serious misjustice.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Honourable people doing what. One of the guys who contacted me is a very talented artist, Antonio Villarreal. His art is fantastic. If I could buy some of it, I would do.
Yeah.
And if we get out there this year, I'll be looking to.
Oh, we will. We will be going out there.
He was forced as a conscript to act as a load person in the back of a C-130, operating from the mainland out to Stanley with resupplies of personnel and equipment. Because he was a conscript, he had no hearing protection. They wouldn't give him any hearing protection. He went deaf.
That is ridiculous.
And after the war was over, he tried to claim for his deafness and so on. They just ignored him. They said, "You're a conscript, sorry, you get no welfare benefits, you get no pension, you get nothing." He's one of the lucky ones because he had this fantastic skill to fall back on, his art. And he's made a living out of art. But most of the others, as you say, are living in poverty.
It's as though the Argentine government are saying, because you were conscripts, you were not soldiers, which is totally wrong because, you know, like you said, these guys, they were willing to give up their life and some did, you know, in Patagonia, just because they were not on the mainland of the Falklands doesn't mean they, you know, my cousin's husband, a friend of mine, you know, he was on the Sheffield and he got burned and stuff. Does it mean those guys, because they were not on the Falklands, don't deserve to be recognised as, you know, it's totally, as Falklands veterans, it's totally ridiculous that government to turn around and say to these men who were willing to give up their lives and did, that you were not being recognised. And I totally disagree with it. It will be a stain on Argentina, on their history forever if they don't address it. I can say is I thank you for doing what you're doing, and I'm going to continue until the day I die, until these guys get recognised.